Today's episode is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Get 10% off your first purchase with the offer code DESIGNDOC. Cheating in video games is eternal. For as long as games have existed, people have looked to get ahead of the system. Sure, you can go for basic glitches and cheat codes, but there's an interesting side story simmering below the surface. An industry rose to make cheating easier and more accessible to everyone. Console manufacturers made countermoves, trying to fend them off and re-establish fair play. From that fight, a window opened that revealed for some games what was always hiding just below the surface. Let's look at the history of console cheat devices, the Game Genie, Game Shark, and others, and see how they started, how they built up their popularity, and how they fell by the wayside. There are lots of ways to cheat in games. In the beginning, there were glitches. Every game that's even remotely complex is guaranteed to have glitches in its code. It's far too complicated to find and fix every glitch in testing, so every shipping game is full of them. Lots of glitches are benign. Audio problems, models clipping through things, but others have gameplay implications. Bunny hopping, wall clipping, lap skipping. Glitches get around the intended design of a game using just the tools that the game itself provides. There's another category of things that twist the design of a game for fun, but in a developer-approved way. Cheat codes. Developers intentionally code in a button combination to change a game, sometimes dramatically. Maybe you unlock all the levels in the game instantly, or get 30 extra lives, or make everyone's heads bigger than normal. Often cheat codes weren't put in just for fun. They were useful as an easy way to test and debug a game. Let's say you're working as a game tester, testing a new platformer. The programmers just created a new build that fixed a major glitch in the final world, and you have to verify that the fix works. It'd be a huge waste of time to play through the whole game again to get to the part that they fixed at the end. Instead, the programmers coded in a secret button combination to immediately unlock the last world, where you needed to test. That cheat code just saved you hours of work. By the end of development, lots of codes might be stuck in the game. They could take them out, but then the testers would have to verify that nothing else broke in the process, and probably no one would find them by accident, so let's just leave them in. They're pretty fun anyway. But glitches and cheat codes rely on behavior that the developer put there, intentionally or not. What if we didn't want Johnny Game Designer telling us what we could do with our game that we paid for? You're going to have to code it up yourself. You're going to need a cheat device. The earliest versions of this are trainers. They're not so much a device, but they were programs built specifically to change the code in another game loaded into memory. Obviously, this was meant for games running on PCs or other computers, where you were loading multiple programs at the same time. In 1983, if you had $15, you could buy one of the earliest trainers, the Great Escape utility. It dramatically changed the original Castle Wolfenstein, acting a lot like what we today call a patch, but it was fan-made. Faster loading times, fewer crashes, but also things that the developer definitely didn't intend. Aim hacks, get any item, start anywhere in the game. You would load the Great Escape utility at the same time as you loaded the game, and the utility would be able to change the game's code on the fly. It was easy to use, and was a popular way to squeeze some more fun out of a game you had already played. But console players were left out in the cold. Consoles of that era didn't run multiple programs at once, so the technique used by trainers wouldn't work. If you wanted to play with memory editing in console games, you'd need some new hardware. Back in 1990, Codemasters developed the Game Genie, the video game enhancer, and licensed it to Galoob. Over time, they released the Game Genie for the NES, SNES, Game Boy, and Sega Genesis. Every Game Genie acted as a middleman between the console and the game cart. You plugged the Game Genie into the console's cartridge slot, then plugged in a game on the other side. Normally, when a console requests data from the game cart, it sends a command to the cartridge directly, where the ROM inside the cartridge would receive the command and respond appropriately. It could be a request for data for level assets, game logic, music, save data, anything and everything that made up a particular game. But when you put a Game Genie between the two, the Game Genie can listen in on the commands traveling between the cartridge and the system. Usually it would just pass the request through as normal, and then pass the cartridge's response back. But you could tell the Game Genie to do something else. All you needed were the magic words, or codes. When you turned on the console with a Game Genie plugged in, you'd first get this cool little menu. In it, you could enter in codes you could find in the codebook that came with your Game Genie. Game Genie codes are, in reality, just tweaked programming instructions. Each code contained a memory location to look for and a value to respond with instead of what the cartridge would normally respond with. If the console asked the cartridge, "Give me the number stored in the place where you keep the player's life count," the game cartridge might normally respond 1. But you could have entered a code that hijacked that request and replaced the value with something else, maybe 99 lives, or 0, which might break other game logic in interesting ways. The instructions you gave the Game Genie were very small, very specific, but you could still make huge and unexpected changes in almost any game released. Infinite ammo and lives? Sure. Gain 1 health instead of losing it when you hit an enemy? Maybe, if you knew the right code. If the console asks, "What abilities do we have unlocked for Super Metroid?" the Game Genie could respond with a value that means all of them. This was memory editing on a console. In the early 90s, that was mind-boggling. The code system and the included codebook made it easy for anyone to use, not just computer-savvy types. A kid could get a huge variety of cheats to work by just punching in codes from the codebooks that came with the Game Genie, but you didn't have to stick with the codebook. You could experiment. Sure, it wasn't the easiest thing in the world to use. Some games used memory techniques that weren't compatible with how the Game Genie worked. Typing in codes randomly probably wouldn't do anything. Some codes would make their game unplayable, but once in a while you'd hit on something. Tweak the Infinite Lives code, and maybe you discover a color palette swap. It was kid-friendly enough, and the success rate was high enough that the Game Genie really did breathe new life into old games. But Nintendo didn't particularly like the idea of people altering the code of their games, so Nintendo sued Galoob in May 1990, alleging that Game Genie codes made a derivative work of the games it was plugged into, violating Nintendo's copyright. The Game Genie was pulled from store shelves while the lawsuit was ongoing, but after a year of litigation, the judge ruled in Galoob's favor in late 1991, saying that the operation of a Game Genie was analogous to skipping pages in a book, or fast-forwarding through a movie. Nintendo was forced to compensate Galoob $15 million for the lost Game Genie sales while the device was barred from sale. Sega, on the other hand, just embraced the Game Genie and licensed the Genesis version outright. Simple enough. The Game Genie was selling very well, and their success led the competition. Daytel was also developing a cheat cartridge called the Action Replay, which was around as early as the Commodore 64. After the success of the Game Genie, Interact licensed the Action Replay for sale in North America and rebranded it as the Game Shark. The technology was advancing too. The PlayStation, Saturn, and N64 Game Sharks had persistent memory, which let you save codes without re-entering them every time. Codes also came preloaded, making it even easier to switch on for new players. The device worked in the same sort of way as the Game Genie, but for the CD-based consoles like the PlayStation and GameCube, it obviously couldn't plug directly into cartridges. It listened in on the system RAM after the game loaded itself. The Game Shark Pro let you find custom codes way more efficiently. Originally for the Game Genie, people used specialized ROM reading hardware to find the codes they would publish in a codebook. The Game Shark Pro let you do that work yourself from home, so you could search for the right memory locations to create your own custom codes in minutes. With this sort of live debugging tool available for home use, Game Shark codes could get way more complicated and varied. With more powerful tools, and a little obscure thing called the internet, Game Shark codes could be found quickly and spread worldwide. Cheat devices aren't only for people who want to cheat. At heart, they're just a tool for inspecting and altering code. That makes them great for cheats, but that's not the only thing they can do. Developers often leave test levels, characters, models, and other leftover ideas inside the final game. They just remove all the normal ways to access the content. The content remains, locked away and largely forgotten. But if you're lucky, you might stumble onto the key with just a couple of custom codes. In GoldenEye, someone playing around with the Game Shark found multiplayer versions of Statue and Cradle, 2 levels that weren't in the multiplayer mode of the final game. They aren't polished like a final level, collision, frame rate, and loading problems are everywhere. But the dev team did a lot of work to both before they were cut. In Zelda Ocarina of Time, there's a model of an Arwing, viewable only through Game Shark codes. It was left over from testing the flight model of the boss Volvagia. During an interview with the game's original staff in 2011, Satoru Takezawa, the boss and enemy designer, said that the code for Volvagia's movement was ported from Star Fox 64, and the Arwing model was brought over in that process. The code for modeling the way objects in flight behaved helped make Volvagia's movements look right. Super Mario Sunshine has a test level only accessible through action replay codes. In it, developers could test jump distances, curved surface behavior, overhead ropes, water physics, and loads of other tricky and specific behaviors and mechanics that would have been a pain to set up and test otherwise. These leftover bits of code are artifacts of the game development process that players rarely get to see. They're living proof of the iterative nature of game design, where ideas are used, tested, improved, thrown out, and refined all the time. And you can see them for yourself thanks to cheat devices. But let's be real, they're mostly used for cheating. And because of that, cheat devices were about to run into a problem. As the generations rolled on, the internet became more integrated in the way players play and talk about games. Discussions with your friends at school or on game message boards slowly started migrating within the walls of the console ecosystem on services like Xbox Live and PlayStation Network. The online services could keep track of the games you played and what you could do in them, and that's really where the new tension with cheat devices appeared. Achievements became extremely popular. They let your friends see how well you did in your games, earn points, and see where they stacked up in comparison. But if an achievement score is going to be worth paying attention to, it wouldn't make sense to let players get points for cheating. If getting a game's final achievement were as easy as entering a GameShark code, that wouldn't be fair to other players. Anyone who spent dozens of hours to beat the game as intended would feel ripped off. Companies now had an incentive to detect the methods of cheaters and bar them from the legitimate achievement ecosystem. Thanks to online connectivity, exploits could be patched out in mandatory game updates. Detection techniques could evolve as new workarounds were found. Developers locked down the game code harder, which neutered the methods used by cheat devices in generations past. Cheaters could have their online accounts banned, which gave an incentive for players to stay away from tinkering with cheat devices. The work done to prevent illegitimate achievements made it harder and riskier to play around with cheat devices. Their popularity declined. But the story didn't end, it just changed. The PC had an entire parallel cheat ecosystem that continues to this day. Cheat engine, trainers and mods, Steam and VAC, but that's a story for another day. Oh, and by the way, someone bought the rights to the Game Genie trademark and rebranded it. Now, it looks like this. Ooh. The story of cheating doesn't end, it just adapts. They may not be as popular as they once were, but cheat devices like the Game Genie and GameShark were some people's first foray into programming, and were a super cool and important part of video game history.
If you're looking to make a website, check out today's sponsor, Squarespace. We've built a few websites over the years, and in our experience, Squarespace is by far the easiest way to get a killer-looking website up and running extremely quickly. They're a one-stop shop with domain registration, easy drag-and-drop tools, no plugins necessary, and great traffic monitoring tools, so you can watch all those sweet page views roll in. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/designdoc and use offer code DESIGNDOC to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain.